Welcome to Firefighting Today, the video roundtable discussion show where we discuss all things fire service related. Firefighting Today is a production of PeteLamb.com. And now your host, Chief Peter Lamb.
Good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining us. We're having a little bit of technical difficulties tonight. Chief Lamb is here, but he's having a little audio problem. So we're going to wing this tonight the best we can. Tonight, we're going to be talking about handline selection and what criteria you use when you roll up on a building and you choose your handline. So we'll introduce the panel first. We'll go right down the line. We'll start with, I don't know, who are we going to choose? We'll choose Chief Whitley.
And tell them who you are, Rob, when we're done here. Hi, Chief Warren Whitley, retired from the Prince William County, Virginia Department of Fire and Rescue, now on my porch in North Carolina.
Lane, go ahead.
Yeah, hi, Lane Woolery, Battalion Chief with San Diego Fire Rescue.
Thank you. Chuck. All right, looks like somebody forget to set his alarm clock. I'm Rob Fling. I'm the next chief with Dix Hills down on Long Island. Oh, Chuck's back. Go ahead, Chuck.
Chuck Bassett, firefighter paramedic, 15 years outside of Detroit, Michigan, Suburban Department.
Thank you. Chief Lamb, you have any audio at all? Okay, doesn't look like it. So we're going to talk about handline selection tonight. So we'll go down the panel first and we'll get some criteria about what goes through their head when they initially choose a handline. Chief Whitley, why don't you start us off?
Sure. This thing's slow coming off mute. Sorry about that. Well, it depends on what we're presented with when we get to the scene, whether it's going to be a big line like a 2.5 or even a 3-inch or the 1.75 most of us have as our jump lines. I'd also think in the message Pete sent out earlier, we wanted to see if anybody was using a 2-inch line. In our department, we used them back in the late 80s with, a lot of success with limited staffing. It was much better and easier to pull that than a 2.5 when you needed it. But, you still don't get quite the volume you get out of a 2.5 when you need the 2.5.
Lane, go ahead.
Well, just because I'd say the culture of my fire department, and so that's what I've grown up with, is we're very much inch and 3/4 based on our initial attack lines for anything involving anything short of a large commercial structure. It's pretty much all 1 3/4 pre-connect all the time, and seems to work pretty well for us.
Chuck, how about you?
I'd say the same thing as Chief Lane's saying there. A lot of the times we're pulling the 1 3/4, and we always got to remember if it's a commercial building, sometimes the appropriate hose size depends. You want to have the 2.5 to get the ability to put that fire out. They always say, officer communication is important. It's also important to have the right hose line, because if you're coming in with the 1 3/4, it's almost, like the saying, pissing in the wind. So make sure you get the right hose line and get it in there.
All right, so let me throw a little curveball at you. Why do you think that we have departments that regularly pull an 1 3/4 on a fire that's obviously a 2.5?
Is that for me?
Just from the volume of fire. Anybody can answer, Rob. Just from the volume of fire that they arrive to.
I kind of think it goes back to training. We go back to what we know. And what we know is the 1 3/4. So we're going to continue to pull that unless we get out there and do actual training with other hoses, so people know how it's going to react, how heavy it is, and if it's another thing that they can have an idea in their mind to pull the 2.5. As long as the guys are aware of it and have done some training, I think it'll be in the forefront of their mind.
Right. And Chief Lamb just threw in the chat room, is it training or is it habit? Because I'll argue the fact that it's habit. Why do we pull the 1 3/4 all the time? Because that's what we always do. Lane, how about you?
All right, there we go. Had to get unmuted. We've got a couple of things. One is, yeah, there's definitely a certain amount of just automatic reflex that causes that to happen. But conversely, we actually teach a hose lay in the academy called back up the 1 3/4, where the initial line comes out as 1 3/4, and then it's backed up by a 2.5 with the second line. That gives us the advantage of getting a line more quickly on the fire, and plus, a lot of times, if you're getting water on the fire before a water supply has actually been established, like in other words, the line from the hydrant maybe hasn't been charged yet, allows you to last a little longer, and then you can stretch that 2.5 dry to the location and get it flowing, a little quicker. So you can actually get the 2.5 in position to support that 1 3/4 on a larger fire.
Warren just threw in, does anyone have a pre-connected portable deluge gun? Yes, I do. Got a blitz fire. One of my favorite things. Now, do you guys have any actually, you know what? Let me go back for a second before I ask the next question. Who calls for line selection in your departments? Is it the officer? Do you have a chief on scene who's telling you to pull 1 3/4 versus 2.5? And does the engine boss have a problem with going over the chief's head and saying, the chief wants 1 3/4, but I have fire 3/4 of the way through this building, I'm going to pull a 2.5? Chuck, go ahead.
The first arriving company officer is the one that's going to make that decision. If you're pulling up on a commercial building, you're most likely going to pull the 2.5, depending on what you have. As with every fire, what you have is how you're going to react to it. So the company officer that's coming on scene, first on scene, taking incident command, is the one that's going to make that decision.
Warren, how about you?
Yeah, typically it'd be the first arriving engine. The chiefs have been known to come in later and tell them to pull bigger lines if it's starting to go bad. But typically it's left up to the engine boss.
Lane?
Yeah, I wouldn't really be in a good position to, most of the times by the time I get it seen, the first couple lines are already off on the fire. So that's definitely a company officer decision. Obviously, with a larger, more, defensive operation, then I'm going to be deploying ladder pipes, things like that. But initially, that's all handline selection is all up to the company officer.
Do you have a criteria for pulling a 2.5 on a private dwelling?
Not really. It's most of our fireground policy is actually fairly broad and allows a lot of interpretation. So it's really entirely company officer's discretion.
When would they normally pull a 2.5 on a PD?
We'll see a 2.5 come off for a attached garage from time to time. Now that we've had the newer rigs have 2.5 pre-connects, so that makes the 2.5 a lot better option for initial attack. The last 2 big commercial fires we've had, the initial lines came off for both 2.5s. So that worked pretty well. But on the other hand, I've had some guys that have trained, gone out and taken some classes, some of those hose classes that are out there, and a lot of good fundamentals, a lot of good skills, but they come back and feel as if they almost need to pull a 2.5. They're looking for opportunities to pull a 2.5. And I've seen some crews pull a 2.5 perhaps inappropriately, where the mobility and speed of the 1 3/4 probably would have been better off for what we were trying to accomplish.
Chuck?
The 2.5 is good, but there's one thing I was looking up today, that the weight of the different hoses, and it doesn't seem like anybody's very clear on it, but for a standard double jacket sized hose, if you're having a 200-foot pre-connect for your fire attack, if you're using an 1 3/4 with the water, you're looking at about 300 pounds. Somebody said to me the other day they're trying a 3-inch, which seems ridiculous to me. But the weight of that is about 760 pounds. And to just think about trying to move that around and put it in place and actually get something done with it, it just seems absurd to me. So,
well, how about if you have an extreme volume of fire? We'll say you have a 60 by 40 private dwelling and you have 2-story, and you have 3/4 of it going on arrival. Are you going to deck gun it? Are you going to 2.5 it? For me, a 2.5 is going to come off the truck just for the reach and the penetration. I'm not worried about moving it because I'll sit that thing right on the front lawn, knock a shit ton of fire down, and then either stretch another 1 3/4 to go finish it up, or I'll put an 1 3/4 right off the smooth bore on the tip of the 2.5.
Right. I mean, I was talking about the 3-inch, though. I mean, where is the cutoff? Is it the 3-inch? You know, people start talking about the 4-inch, or we just start holding 5-inch. Obviously, that's not going to happen. But you know what you're saying there, it does make sense to have the 2.5 and or do a deck gun. Just depends on what you have, obviously. But it's something to keep in mind is how much weight you're adding to your hose that you're trying to knock the fire down with.
Warren?
I think if you're doing a defensive setup and you have 3-inch available, it makes just as much sense if you're going to put a Keenan loop in it anyway to flow that versus the 2.5, because that's even more volume you'll get, and you're not having to move it anywhere.
Lane, you got anything to add?
Yeah, actually, you know, the one thing you pull up at a private family dwelling, something like that, and you've got 600 or 800 square feet involved. You know, you got to remember, is it 800 square feet of building, or is it 4 200 square foot rooms? So that's the one thing where, you know, I've found that you're dealing with these smaller compartments where a lot of times people will say, well, it's either a fire in a big building or several, you know, a small compartment in a bigger building or several smaller compartments. And that's where you know, typically for a 200 square foot room, 5 seconds out of 1 3/4 is going to knock that down, but then you have to move. And, you know, a lot of people take those classes with the 2.5s and they move really well in a parking lot or in a drill tower, but moving it around somebody's yard, you know, the 1 3/4 really allows you to hit and move and then reposition and hit again.
Do you have a lot of open concept interiors in your houses?
Well, more and more, you know, the newer parts of the city, they're building more and more houses with those larger, you know, the McMansions like everybody else. But, you know, coming up through most of my career, the houses were all really 800 to 1,200 square feet with 10 by 12 rooms.
Warren?
I think we're probably all in the same boat. Newer houses are more open with the cathedral ceilings and the whole open floor plan. I mean, there was houses in Prince William when I left. The one across from the academy was 17,000 square feet. So I think we've discussed this before. We need to start treating those houses over about 3,000 square feet as commercial buildings, just because of the volume of potential of fire and the access and things like that.
Which was going to lead me into my next question. I know where I am, we actually have houses that we have pre-planned at the first line off the trucks to 2.5. Don't even waste your time with an 1 3/4. Just because of the open floor plan, the square footage, the hazards that are in the house, like coffered ceilings that aren't attached to the structure. We're just going to try to blast the hell out of this thing from the front door if we can get in, or as far as we can get in with a 2.5, and just use the reach of the stream and the gallonage to just knock the fire down and see what we got. And then we'll worry about taking it with the 1 3/4 from there. Have any of you guys ever experimented with, if you had a 200-foot pre-connect going with 175 at 2.5 and the last length of 50 for the 1 3/4?
You know, it's funny you mentioned that, because actually I was thinking that I'm not a big fan of the 2-inch hose, just because a lot of people are, you know, pushing that as I'm hearing some of the same arguments in favor of the 2-inch as I heard back, you know, in the 80s in favor of the 1 3/4. It's, you know, all the maneuverability with less the friction loss. But yeah, putting like on a 200-foot pre-connect is the longest we'll have, but having the first 100 feet of that to be 2-inch, or, you know, even going with like a 300-footer, you could do that. You have your first 100 or 200 feet with a larger diameter hose, 200 or 2-inch or 2.5. It's going to really help your friction loss numbers and shouldn't really impact your maneuverability that much.
Well, the last 50 of 1 3/4 actually works really good for the maneuverability, and it does give you more water. Chuck?
Be curious to crunch the numbers and see what if you went to 1.5 inches for that last length and see what that did for the friction loss numbers.
Chuck, you experiment with anything like that?
I mean, we pulled the 2.5, I guess, I think over in Phoenix or wherever they call it, the horizontal standpipe. And then we'd break it off into the bundles. 150 though is what we're using. That gives you the ability to maneuver if you're in apartment complexes, if you got to get upstairs, downstairs, wherever you got to get going with it and get in there and try to hit it quick. But you still can get the 2.5 to the door also. And, if it doesn't work out, then you go back to the defensive and you can set up a blitz nozzle.
Warren,
Another thing,
at that point?
I remember we did experiments way back when the 2-inch was introduced at some of the companies. The maneuverability seemed to be okay. And we were moving up from 1.5 inches. We didn't even have 1 3/4 at the time. But there are a lot of companies up there that still have leader line pre-connects for doing some of the garden apartments where access is hard to get to. So it'll be, I think it's 150 feet at 2.5, and then the gated Ys on the end of that, which you put your 1 3/4 on. And that was those are pre-connected lays, so they would just run and go.
How about nozzles? What kind of nozzles you guys using?
I think most of the companies up there are still using combination fog nozzles. I mean, they have the smooth bores accessible in the cabinets, but most of the pre-connects have fog.
How about out west there, Lane?
Our pre-connected tack lines are we're still 100 psi combo nozzle with select gallonage.
Chuck?
we're using combination nozzles. When you're looking also about smooth bores for high-rise applications, it's a lot less psi. You got any kind of commercial or industrial, you probably want to use that for the reach and penetration. Helps put it on the fire and won't have to get too close with the smooth bore. Less prone to clogging also, like the fog nozzle would be, especially with all the different stuff in the standpipe. You might have a lot of rust and stuff in there, and you'll clog out with the combination.
Warren? Talk nozzles for a little bit. I'm sure you can go a half an hour on that.
Well, my personal preference for most applications is still a fog. But if you got big fire and especially defensive ops, smooth bore for the reach and the flow is the way to go. But for interior firefighting, I'm still going with little droplets.
How about for standpipe packs?
I'd have to dig deep in my memory, but I think we were still running combination nozzles on most of the standpipes because we didn't really have real high rises, a few mid rises here and there.
Lane?
High rise, it's 75 psi combination nozzles, and then they have a little breakaway. You can break off the combination piece, and there's a 7/8 smoothbore tip in there. It allows you to, theoretically flow more effective at 50 psi, or also to clear a clog. Little slug tips, and they actually give you a halfway decent stream.
How about master streams? You guys ever choose? You pull up to something where it's deck gun right out of the gate?
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. I was actually just drilling with a crew this morning on that, showing them how there's a YouTube video of a crew that shows up whole front of a house going real good, and they hit it with a deck gun while they're stretching the hand line, and we were just doing the flow calcs that we ride around most of the time with the 600 GPM stack tip on the monitor, and even with 30 seconds of flow, you're still going to have 250 gallons of water depending on which rig left, and that's a good chance to get a lot of knockdown on the fire while there's a hand line getting stretched out, and then a water supply gets established, and then we just move on from there. And actually, LA County Fire has produced a couple of videos on that. It's on Vimeo that are real interesting training product.
Chuck?
Yes, definitely the deck gun has a place. Recently, we were using it for dumpster fires. You know, you pull right up. You don't have to have the guys take an 1 3/4 or get real close to the fire, and then you're digging through it for hours. Pull right up and dump the deck gun. It works really good. Fill up the dumpster.
Any of you guys have a gate on your deck gun? That way, let me ask you before you answer that with the gate on the deck gun. The reason why we do it is while our crew might be stretching hand lines, the chauffeur can charge the deck gun, and then he can hop up top, and he doesn't have to worry about wasting water. He can put that deck gun where he wants, open up that gate, and he's not worried about shooting water over the house or shooting next door. He's got a good shot at it. And then when he needs to go charge the hand lines, he can just shut that down like a gentleman, jump down and go and take care of his lines. Go ahead, Lane.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I hate to say it, but our rigs used to have those. And that was something that you could do, or the engineer could just set the pressure and then somebody could hop up there and do it while the engineer was off dragging a line to the hydrant or whatever. But unfortunately, our new rigs don't have that. And actually, the way they're stowed, they're kind of folded down, so they provide a little better clearance. So as rigs have grown taller in the stations that were designed for back when we had, horses, I think it's tough to fit the rigs in them. So it takes about 3 or 4 steps, and I hate to say it, but it's almost like a Rubik's Cube. If you haven't drilled on it, it takes a while to deploy that deck gun. I've seen crews struggle. So yeah, this morning I was part of that drill was to make sure that crew had some muscle memory for getting that deck gun deployed in a timely manner. And, again, if you're going to go all in off the tank, you got to make sure you've got it aimed the right way, because you can't really afford to. I've seen crews turn the little dial the wrong way and raise the stream when they meant to depress it. And, you're wasting precious gallons if you're just going in off the tank. And then the only other piece, I was actually having a discussion the other day on social media about using the deck gun in that capacity. If you're going to do that, you almost have to think about that as an option as you're spotting your pump. A lot of times we pull up, we're thinking about leaving room for the truck, seeing 3 sides of the building, thinking about a lot of things other than using the deck gun initially. And a couple times we've spotted the rig and said, oh, hey, yeah, let's use the deck gun. It's great, but your angle's off. And one time we were just hitting the sidewall of the fire compartment, and of course, knowing now with the water mapping study that UL did, we knew, now I know exactly what we were doing. We were just washing one side of the room and creating a big puddle in the back of the room. And another time we went to do that, and there was, of course, a tree in the way. So that took that option off the table.
Pete, you want to check your rodeo? Yeah, not working. Warren, you got anything on the big line up top?
Yeah, I like them. Again, it's like Lane and Chuck said, you got to make sure you're aimed properly before it gets charged. And unfortunately, none of the apparatus I've ever been on has a gate valve up there, which would be kind of handy, especially when you're trying to get the engineer to do a whole lot of work while guys are deploying other lines.
Are your deck guns portable? Can they come off the rig? Set them up in front of the building?
Yeah, most of them. But I think, down here where I'm at now, the rigs have both. They have a pre-mounted and a portable. So it's a portable and separate. And I think that's become a trend up where I was as well.
Lane, how about you?
Well, yes, by definition, they are portable, and there's a little base that goes with it. And in practical terms, though,
leave it on
getting
the
them disconnected and put forward, it's a time-consuming process. It takes, there's a few steps involved, and you got to go up, and it's not something you can deploy rapidly. It's not like a blitz monitor type situation. It would have to be for a, you want to set up a line in the collapse zone, or set up something on a flammable liquid tank that you want to keep cool, but you don't want to have anybody near it, that sort of thing. It's
Yeah.
fairly time consuming.
If you know you're going to be there for a while, it's an option.
Exactly.
Chuck?
Yeah, they are portable, but like Chief Lane and everybody else was saying, it just takes so long to get up there and actually get everything. If it's not stuck, pull it off, make sure it's, and then having to reset it up. You could get the blitz nozzle a lot quicker and put that in position, set it, and leave it there. I mean, those things are great. So I would say just go with the blitz nozzle before you start maneuvering that off your rig.
Yep, absolutely. What do you supply them with? 2.5s or a 5-inch?
Yeah, easy 2.5.
I'm sorry, say that again.
2.5.
Lane?
Well, ours are. I can remember, the old rigs used to have a little trimes that would come off, and you'd have to run 3 sets of 2.5s out to it. But now, the last few generations of rigs have all been a 4-inch. And what you do is you create a big loop with the 4-inch, and there's a little piece of chain, and then the weight of the 4-inch actually anchors down the front of the portable monitor stand and keeps it in place.
Warren? You looking at mosquitoes?
No, one of Laura's little chickadees just came back looking for food. It's spring, so it's small bird rehab. It depends on the rig because there's not a standard rig up in Prince William anymore, but most of them are the portable ones. If the pumper has a split bed, they'd run 3-inch to it, otherwise 5 or 2.5.
How many guys are you running on an engine?
They're trying to keep 4 as minimum on the engines, but 3 is normally minimum, although the way staffing has been beefed up, they probably have 4 more often than that.
Do you do stack 2 companies together if you have a long stretch or if you have a complicated stretch in the building just to get the first line in operation?
Yeah, usually stuff like that would be pre-planned out, like some of the larger nursing homes, hospital, things like that. So they'd have a plan on how to get water where they needed it. And there's pre-assigned in the whole of Northern Virginia. There's pre-assigned box assignments for the first arriving, second arriving, and so on. Who's got water supply? Who's red? It's all planned out.
Chuck, how about you? How many guys on the rig? And
we're running 2 guys on the engine, but we come together with 4 guys all together because we have the light truck and the engine go together as one crew.
You use that basically just to get one line in operation?
It just depends. Usually the first arriving company officer, then the 3 other guys. The one guy is pumping, and then got the company officer and the 2 other firefighters pulling the hose and stretching it. And then you probably have all 3 of those guys coming in together.
So what's it going to look like for like a basement fire? Are you going to break the crew up and stretch 2 lines right off the bat? Are you going to wait for somebody else to show up to get you?
We have about 30 square miles, but we're pretty good as far as coming in. You have your company officer coming in with the first crew, but right behind that, you're going to have other crews coming in. So, you're going to set up your first line with that first oncoming crew, gives the incident command system started, and then he's going to tell the other guys what he needs, as the incident progresses from what he finds, obviously. So,
Lane, what are you riding with out there?
Well, we're 4.0 across the board. And, typically the first in company officer is expected to take incident command. So he's out of the equation in terms of the actual fire attack. And it's the 2 firefighters, they'll usually turn loose, they'll turn around and say, hey, guys, pull the 150 or whatever, and they'll start doing that. Then when the next engine gets there, that company officer actually becomes the fire attack group supervisor. So you end up with 5 people with 1 supervisor taking an attack line. And that will be like, if it's one of those things where what we call the condo lay, which is the, 2.5 to a wide off to a hose bundle for like garden style apartments or, because we have lots of boats around here, the stretch out on a pier. The first 2 firefighters on the initial company will start that, and then as the next company comes in, they'll pick up at the tailboard and start pulling that 2.5 on out to the objective. And of course, if it's a 800-foot pier, then there's going to be additional companies that are grabbing more line to make that stretch happen. But yeah, and so, but on a more like routine fire where like our single family dwelling, the first crew will pull off a pre-connect, second crew will pull off the backup line. So we'll have 2 lines in play with 4 firefighters and 1 captain.
Do you have riding positions as far as the engine?
Yes and no. There's we have a designated what we call a drop-off person. That's going to be the person that's left at the hydrant, and then the other person's a line breaker. And that's vestigial back from the days when we actually, first in company, would lay with a 2.5 with the clappered Siamese and what have you. Very typically in our operations today, with the 4-inch hose and the larger tanks, the first in company will just go directly to the fire spot, ideally leaving room for the truck, and start a fire attack with the next in engine bringing in a water supply. Or, you know, a lot of times the next in engine will show up, and while that second captain becomes fire attack group soup, his engineer will help the first engineer hand stretch a line, you know, 100 or 200 feet to a hydrant.
Chuck, riding positions?
In a sense, you know, it sounds like every time I hear Chief Lane talk, it kind of sounds like how we work in our department. But coming up as far as the engine, if we can, we'll try to get our own water source established. If not, you know, we'll let the next coming crews know that we do not have a water source established at that time, and they're going to help us out, pull that. Yeah, and we try to leave room, obviously, for the truck in front, too, depending on what you got. And if it goes defensive, you know, they got room to get in there and take care of business.
Warren, how about?
Yeah, engine guys have riding assignments, usually nozzleman's designated. Some of the companies will have the driver do the layout. Usually nozzleman, if there's 4 guys, the other guy is forcible entry. The ladder trucks all have riding positions and assignments, as I'm pretty sure the heavy rescues do as well these days. And then usually the heavy rescue on a fire is going to assign an interior crew and an exterior crew to help the truck.
Right. We run full crew for us is the chauffeur, the officer. 4 guys in the back is the nozzle, backup, doorman, and control. Speaking of the control guy is usually in charge of is estimating the stretch, especially if we're not going to use a pre-connect. Other than that, he's basically chasing kinks. But let's talk for a second. Besides going with the obvious pre-connect that might come up short, when are we going to start looking at stretching off the back, stretching off the dead bed off the back, and then what criteria are we going to use to estimate our stretch? Lane, you want to start us out on that?
Yeah, you know, I've taken a few classes on the subject, and I've never really come up with a good rule of thumb other than just the, you know, the educated Mark I eyeball, and you just kind of take a look at it, look like if it pre-connect's going to get it. You know, a lot of times, if you can see, if you're at the rig and you can see the opening, that gives you a real good idea of if your pre-connect's going to make it. You know, otherwise, and there's several complexes like everybody else. You know, you have certain districts that have these complexes where you just know there's no way in hell your pre-connect's going to make it. So the reason we call it the condo lay is because there's a lot of condominium complexes around here, especially here in my first due up here in this part of the city. That's exactly what that lay is tailor-made for.
Warren?
Oh, come on. Yeah, I'm like Lane. It was the old Mod 1 Mark 1 eyeball, except for pre-planned complexes. I will relay, when I was the new guy on an engine company, I told the officer one day we needed to add 50 feet for a car fire down a really long driveway. He said, "No, we don't." It was short. So after that, he figured I was pretty good at estimating distances, so we didn't have that problem of him not listening anymore.
Chuck?
I think it goes back to training and knowing how far your hose is going to go. One of the things I'm working on here in our department is a curbside stretch, just to actually mark the curb so you know what 50 feet is, what 100 feet is, 150, 200. A lot of times these new kids coming on, they always say, well, he doesn't know how to start a chainsaw. And they may have never started a chainsaw until the fire academy. Well, that can go the same thing with the distances. I mean, they might not have a good idea of what 50 feet is or what 100 feet is. So, that's something just to put curbside markings, letting everybody know this is put a start mark and then 100 feet and 200 feet, and that's how far it'll go. Obviously, when you get in a house, there's a lot of turns and things like that. But at least it'll help a little bit. So
there's probably an app for that.
Yeah, you just take a picture of the house and I'll tell you.
Well, let's check. If not, we'll get started on one. Lane, go ahead.
Right. Well, I was going to say, it just occurred to me here, another wrinkle that's kind of changed the little dynamics of the hose stretch, no pun intended, is the use of the transitional attacks, kind of a new concept for us here in Southern California. And so what I've been teaching to my battalion is we're calling it the 2-line transitional attack. Whereas, we initially taught you stretch a line, you get it charged, you give yourself 10 seconds of water off the ceiling while everybody else is masking up, and then in the front door they go with that line. Well, there's times when, perhaps not even on a second floor fire, where there's an opportunity to pull the 100-footer, charge that, and flow that transitionally while the actual interior attack line, the 150 or the 200 pre-connect is getting stretched up to the door, prepped up, and then the crew's getting ready to go in. So there can be that's where, you have to make sure if you're going to do that, you have 2 different objectives with 2 different lines. And so, I try to use the 100-footer if at all possible, just because it frees up that other line that's actually going to go up into the fire compartment.
Warren, got anything to chime in?
Well, it's a training issue, but we did a lot with the driver pulling the lines while the walk around was done. And you can do the same if they're pulling a line for a transitional attack. The driver can take the interior line and at least get it up to the front door and flake it out. So when they're ready to transition, it's all ready to go. And that's something you got to work on, because it becomes a coordination issue.
How about backstretching? Any of you guys backstretch?
Backstretch to the hydrant?
Yeah, drop your lines at the address, and the engine goes off to the hydrant.
Yeah, occasionally. Usually the first in engine, if they don't catch the hydrant or there's not one right there, they'll have a reverse lay with the next pumper from them to the water supply.
Lane?
Yeah, it's funny. I don't even think they teach that in the academy anymore. I remember being taught the reverse lay, where you'd get off your attack line and all your tools and equipment, your SCBA, and the rig would drive away. But really, in this day and age, with 4-inch and the larger tanks, I think that, again, that whole reverse lay concept actually dates back to the old chemical hose wagons and steamer pumps and things like that. And that I think it would, if we tried it now, I think it would cause problems, if for no other reason than you don't have your rig there anymore in front of the fire building.
We still have departments to do that right out of the gate around here. They pull up, they see fire, and they drop their lines, and the engine takes off. Chuck, how about you?
Yeah, we don't do that too often. I mean, that's a huge deal. If you don't have your equipment, it's all the way down by the hydrant. You kind of limited yourself. I mean, things do change. The company officer is doing 360 and his engine's gone and he's got another plan, and it's not going to happen. Unless he has the manpower or another engine right behind him that can help him out and get that done. So you kind of set yourself up for one way is the only way there, So that's why we don't do it too often here.
Now, Rob, what I did leave out on that was I think there's some room for doing that with the supply line, where the second in pump will drop, or second or third in pump will drop their 4-inch there and then drive on out to the hydrant. Mm-hmm. The only problem where that comes in, if they're third in, you've got the first in pump there, typically the second in pump, and maybe even the truck, plus a half a dozen police cars. So that pump's got to actually pull up drive essentially through the scene and then down the street to a hydrant. And a lot of times it's just tough to get, there's not room to get essentially 3 rigs passed on one street.
What distance hydrants? How far are your hydrants apart?
300 to 500 feet, you know, depending on the area. But yeah, really, I mean, you know, people talk about water shuttles and water supplies. I've literally spent my entire career, you know, within 500 feet of a hydrant. So the whole concept of, you know, water tenders, or, you know, tankers as y'all call them, and water shuttles and portable tanks and all that stuff. I mean, that's
foreign language to me.
Yeah, that stuff that happens in the wildland, and you know, the forestry people have people that do that for us.
The first hydrant don't work, go the opposite direction a few hundred feet. You'll get another one. Oh,
sure. You know, I've worked downtown most of the time, and, you know, almost my whole career, and you can literally, everywhere you stop, you're within line of sight within 1 or most likely 2 hydrants.
Chuck, what do you got for water supply?
Yeah, we're pretty good here. You know, pretty much every corner, 500 feet. Before I got to this department, though, I was in a different department where the residents voted to not have any hydrants. So it was all shuttling and pools and setting up tankers and going back and forth. That's going to slow down your response time and what you can do. But once you get all that set up, eventually, then you turn around, the house is pretty much engulfed in flames.
Warren?
It's gotten better. The western half of the county used to be fairly rural, so it was tanker operations. And with the build out, water supply is not nearly as difficult on that side as it used to be. The more urban end of the county had, you know, was 500 feet was, you know, the distance between them.
Anybody ever have to use that draft word?
Drafted a lot, including a lot of the ponds and water designated access sites had dry hydrants, so they could hook right up to the dry hydrant to draft, which made life a little easier.
If I was a chauffeur and you made me draft, that building is burning down.
It's easy. You
Never done it. Not once, ever. Never even trained on it.
Only in training, and I got to admit, it's kind of fun. It's you know, you feel more like an old school engineer or something. You almost want to go take your helmet off and put on the little bus driver hat while you're, you know, sitting there doing that, like a, you know, old school horse-drawn engineer, steam powered.
Chuck?
Yeah, we're not doing too much drafting here. Like I said, in the other department I was at about 18 years ago, maybe I did some of that. And it was fun, you know, setting up the pools and going from, you know, sucking it up and pushing it out and bringing it to other hydrants or to other engines. And it's a lot of fun. So, yeah.
Guys have anything else to add?
Yes, just remember, you don't suck the water up. It's lifted by the atmospheric pressure pushing it into the hose.
Correct. Thank you, Chief.
No problem. We don't want to give out bad information.
All right, why don't we start to wrap it up? And you guys have anything else to add? Line selection, engine ops, anything else you got?
You know what, Rob? I got something for you here.
Go ahead.
In doing my prep for this, I was looking at I learned something about the National Fire Academy water flow formula. That formula is actually calculated, you know, the old length times the width divided by third. It's based on the total amount of water you need to extinguish the problem. That includes backup lines and exposure lines and everything like that. That really, for the number that it gives you for what you actually have on fire, you really only need about half of that number. So, you know, at least according to the formula. So that's just a little food for thought. I wanted to be able to discuss the formula in terms of line selection. So, you know, if it's telling you need 300 GPM for the size of the compartment you have, that's total. That really you should be able to actually get knocked down on that fire with, you know, half that, so like 150 GPM. And the numbers from the interior and exterior full-scale studies that UL just did, they found that they were getting total knockdown on those 1 and 2 bedroom fires with, you know, initial knockdown and, you know, not counting overhaul, of course, with less than 100 or maybe even sometimes less than 75 gallons total.
Much like they're finding with the transitional attack, just flow a little water in our window while you're getting ready and you're knocking down a hell of a lot of fire.
Yeah. Or if you can close the door, you might not need any water at all.
That's true. Chuck, you have anything to add?
No, I don't have anything else. I mean, you know, if you have the big fire, big water is the saying that I think Chief Alan Brunacini used to say. You know, our mentor and yogi. So, but even if you have a small fire, you know, it has the increased potential for the fire growth and spread in a commercial building. So, even if it's a small fire, big water, big fire, big water. So go big or go home.
Any of you guys ever have that adults acronym in the back of your head when you pull up and you're thinking about what line you need?
Yeah, you know, it's funny you mentioned that because I had that actually in the little promo I did for this roundtable on Twitter today. I put that adults acronym up there, and yeah, we had a large auto repair place go up a few months back, and that was actually my commentary on that. Was, you know, even an 1 3/4 centric fire department like mine could act like an adult when needed to, and that was the situation where, I mean, the thing was going like a bomb when the first in company got there, and the first in captains pulled 2.5s off, you know, appropriately so.
Right. It helps. I mean, you keep that in the back of your head and you pull up on something. Somebody once told me if the first words out of your mouth are, oh shit, you should pull a 2.5.
You know, maybe we should talk about adults real quick just for, you know, anybody watching that doesn't know about it. So it's what, advanced fire conditions, right?
Advanced fire condition, defensive operations, unable to determine the extent of the fire. If you have a large uncompartmented area, anytime you need tons of water, and then the S is for standpipe operations.
There we go. And if you can't remember that, feel free to Google it. There's tons of material on it out there. A couple of nice images. There's some nice little posters out there too. You can post up in the station.
Yep. Anybody else have anything else? We'll start to wrap this up. Okay, I'm going to take that as a no. So I guess we'll start to wrap this up. Thanks for joining us, everybody. We'll see you next week. And hopefully we'll have ourselves technical difficulties a little ironed out here. And we'll be back to normal with Chief Lamb as our host. So thanks for joining us, everybody. We'll see you next week.